and thank you very much for inviting me to here today. It's been a fascinating conference so far, really interesting. I don't often say I'm a landscape architect anymore, for all sorts of reasons, but I am. I thought, this is where I come from, this is where I grew up. I was actually born in Birmingham, but I grew up in South Wales, where I would tell the time of day by the sound of the waves, the position of the sun on the horizon, the smell of the spray, knowing that if it was noisy from that side, it meant we were going to have hot weather. If it was noisy from that side, we were going to get some rain. And so identity by landscape to me is absolutely essential, to the extent that this is my garden where I've had to put in a north, south, east, west axis, so I get some idea of where the wind's coming from, because of course in the winter you have no idea. I cut my teeth in Salford as a landscape architect, Salford City Council, where I worked for the derelict land reclamation team. People used to laugh when I told them that, because it was like a job for life, because there was so much derelict land. And this is Salford Quays that I'll come back to in a bit. I have quite a strong background in ecology, habitat creation, urban management, all of these sorts of things, which I never mentioned when I came to Birmingham to teach landscape architecture, because I wanted to know more about design. This is Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe set up the Institute just to explain where I'm coming from. I wrote a book about how you teach design, trying to understand why we think we can't teach design and how we can. And that led me to redefine theories of perception, which is why the book took me 15 years to write, much to a lot of the university's frustration. Because of the work that I did with Jellicoe, I got involved with my professional institute and became the president of the Landscape Institute in the UK. And then just recently, I've just been for a year, I'm the president of the International Federation. And this is my executive team. When we have our executive meetings, it covers 8 time zones from all over the world, which is hairy, interesting, difficult to negotiate. And the thing that I get from that really is that landscape is so important. Across the world, it is gaining in significance as people are beginning to recognise the value that it has for communities. And in terms of a sense of identity, in terms of quality of life. As a bit of background, when I spoke at the West Midlands Park Forum, I realised that actually it all started here in the Black Country when I was the way of thinking that I'm going to talk to you about, because I was asked to look at the Black Country Urban Park for the Black Country Consortium. This is probably about 2005. And I thought, if they think that I'm going to just join up all the green bits, then actually I'm not really interested in that. But if you think about the Black Country as a whole, as an urban park, then that can give us a different way of thinking about the place. And that led to all sorts of interesting ideas, including realising even at that time that water would become the new gold, that actually you had to walk to work because it would cost too much to drive. And that would have a huge effect spatially and physically on the environment. Now, it led to various other initiatives. It went forward for a living lottery bid, but we didn't get it. It also led me to look at a project in Birmingham, Spaghetti Junction, which is just at the top there, to try and understand how we could... So it's this large-scale thinking. This is looking at Spaghetti Junction, thinking where can we see it from within Birmingham. And these little bits here these are the high bits of ground that I managed to identify. So you could begin to think about Spaghetti Junction not as a means of escape, but as a point of arrival. When kids can say, are we nearly there now? How we could use it to actually monitor the pulse of the region. And that involved, again, referring back to the work in Dudley, looking at the regional beacons to try and think about how you can create that sense of identity, so that you could look over to Spaghetti Junction and think, God, it's cold out there, I'm going to put another jumper on because it was glowing blue, or because it was really red because there are so many transactions going on in the city. Or you could begin to look up to the Bar Beacon or across to the regional beacons. So you can always begin to locate yourself by landscape wherever you are in the area. Because, of course, at the moment you can't do that because there's so much, you almost get no sense of the landscape whatsoever. So that led me to this leads me to HS2LV, and I went to the City Council 3.5 years ago and said, this railway project that's coming through, possibly, I'm not talking about whether it should go ahead or not, but if it does go ahead, you need to employ me for 2 years. If you want it to go ahead well. And of course the guy, he didn't do that. He took me out for a cup of coffee for 6 months, every 2 weeks. And during that time I managed to persuade him that there might be a different way of thinking about landscape, a different way of thinking about how we could deliver infrastructure, and actually about how we could use the fact of this huge project to actually as a way of transforming the region, as a catalyst for social and economic growth. Because I don't think it should even be thought about as a linear engineering project. But it's going to be this enormous event that's going to affect people's lives in the region, actually up and down the whole length of the country eventually. It'll change the landscape, it'll change the economy. And so HS2LV, this project I've been working on, is a way of thinking about how we can integrate the lines and the landscape. It's like a blueprint for how the future could look if we adopt a different approach. And it's actually about thinking in a very multidisciplinary way about the landscape, looking at the social, the cultural, the hydrological systems of the region. It's about thinking about how we could actually use this as a way to increase aspirations, to actually demand better quality environments and create an upward spiral for demand. It's a way of trying to get a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom. And how we can actually use the fact that this railway is coming through to change the identity of the region so that we have a problem with our identity. How can we use this to actually change it? So that in the end, the region can become a global place, a place for people to come from all over the world. Underpinning it, there are a number of issues. For example, that it takes a long time. So to go back to Salford Quays, when I was working there all that time ago, when they said Salford Quays is going to be a new water quarter for the city, and we all thought, oh yeah, it'll never happen. You've got to be joking. And there's going to be this wonderful architect's design building at the end of Salford Quays, and we thought, it'll never happen. It's just not good enough to happen. But then a while ago, somebody said, I don't know how Graham Stringer persuaded the BBC to move to Salford Quays. What on earth has he done there? And they used to say that kings made cities, but perhaps we should actually say that politicians made cities. And I said, no, it's not that. It's because we had a long-term vision 30 years ago. And it's taken that time, but we've achieved change. Now, it might not be perfect, but it is dramatically different from what it was all those years ago. The other thing to really realise is that quality environments are actually a key part of attracting inward investment. So this is Sant Cugat de Val, which is outside Barcelona, which this park was put in order to attract investment. And it became known as the Green Park, the place where everybody wanted to live, because the quality of life was so important. This is Eastside Park, near where I work in this building up there. That cost £11 million, one of the first city centre parks in the UK to be built, but it's already brought in £130 million worth of investment nearby. And so how, as I say there, how can we use the fact that the stations are coming into the region to actually build on this success? The other thing that it is to have a different way of thinking about landscape. So landscape is, of course, ecology, nature conservation, matters of heritage. And it is, of course, the physical context in the towns and cities, as Liam said. It's the forests and the woodlands, the constructed public realm, gardens and allotments, places to sit and watch the world go by. But the really important thing about it is that it's our memories and our values. This is what landscape is. If you just think about where you grew up and how much that has shaped your identity and your culture, who you are, then you begin to think about landscape in a very different way and realise it's a very, very powerful idea. And if we start engaging communities with that idea, then you're really talking, and it makes all the difference in the world. It's a sense of pride that we have in a place. It's the experience that we have in a place, whether we're living there or working there or studying there. And it all comes back to ideas and the expression of ideas, and this is what shapes the quality of our experience. To try and understand that, means looking at the landscape, remembering the stories you were told at school about where you grew up and the area that you lived in, hearing the stories from your grandparents, from what you've read about it, understanding the experience that you've had of the landscape, thinking about the urban and the rural, thinking about the grotty places as well as the beautiful places, understanding how people use a place across the year, how they engage with the landscape and the environment through the day, realising that there are absolutely vital connections between governance, culture, health and economics, as we've been hearing today. One of the projects that I've worked on recently this is in the quite close to Spaghetti Junction, this is the Deakin Primary School here. We've got some people from Birmingham, Alabama, to come to Birmingham, and to get the kids to draw about, these kids knew that their school got wet, right? That it was flooded, but they didn't know where the river was or that there was a river there. And so it was actually trying to get them to, taking them to look at the river, taking them to talking about the river sprites and all that. And we had an absolutely amazing time that they will never forget. This idea about landscape, the relationship that people have with the landscape also has an international dimension. I've been working with UNESCO for the last 5 years to think about how we might create an international landscape convention, because the special and elite places, they're sort of protected. You've got lists of the best in the world. But we haven't got anything that protects the landscape of daily life, the everyday landscape, the places where people live. And the reason why UNESCO are very interested in this is because it helps them overcome those disciplinary silos that we've been hearing about, those professional silos between science and art, between nature and culture. Because the daily landscape, where you grew up, that's the same for everybody. It doesn't have those different those silos. And actually, it's because they also recognise, that this relationship that a community has with the landscape is as powerful in these everyday, ordinary landscapes as it is in the monumental landscapes like Stonehenge or Florence, or wherever we've got these listed places. And it is as powerful in communities across the world, whether they are in Thurrock or Birmingham, or actually I've been doing some work in Thurrock or Salford, sorry. And it is as powerful there as it is in communities, for example, in Yarwuru Coastal County or the Stanningcott stock route in Australia. And when you actually realise how powerful that is, it gives us a way of tackling or looking at the landscape. For so long, we haven't even bothered to look at it. The landscape is a pale imitation of what it is. If you look at it on the planning maps, it's usually pale green, as though it's just empty, vacant. What we've been doing is looking at the towns, looking at the cities, focusing on the buildings. And although landscape is always used to sell projects, it always gets cut off at the end because you've run out of money, because we don't actually value it. But the public realm, that structure is absolutely vital. And when you start talking about talking about it in terms of the relationship that we have with the landscape, that also gives a way of articulating how we can respond to global challenges. So we need to look upwards as well as into the detail, looking at things such as urbanisation, shifting populations. Actually, even I was in Moscow a couple of weeks ago, we were even talking about areas of conflict where there seems to be, where communities are completely dispossessed, dislocated. They have no sense of culture or history. Identity seems to have no foundation. How can we use landscape as a way to recover this sense of pride in the places that people have? And that's the same across the world. Look at where we've so much lost the sense of understanding the landscape that we build nuclear power stations on fault lines. Why would we do that? This is Tewkesbury in 2008. Do you remember the floods there? Look at the abbey. And the monks knew where to build things. They understood flooding, but it's not a good idea to build in a floodplain unless you flood-proof it. Well, how can we reclaim this knowledge, this experience, this expertise, actually, to understand how we should deal with these places? How we can deal with drought, climate change. These are things that are affecting us here as much as they are in Africa or the Middle East or wherever. We usually think they're somewhere over there. Now, there's a huge support for this, as I said, this approach, because it helps to really cut across the different identities, the different boundaries that we are all afflicted with afflicted with at the moment. So how do we work with this new idea? Well, one of the things is to have a completely different economic model, which of course we're being forced into, but having a different, in terms of HS2, thinking about not just the here and now, getting it built for the cheapest amount of money, but thinking about what's the benefit of considering the long-term costs of continuing with 19th and 20th century practices? How could we actually think about the benefit of adopting a different approach when we actually recognise the lure of beautiful places? We think about the High Line. I don't know whether you've heard about this, but this is in, or if any of you have been there. The High Line in New York cost a huge amount of money to build, but the inward investment that comes from that has been absolutely phenomenal. It's way exceeded what they were expecting because it's an extraordinary place. People want to go and see it. How can we think about having a holistic view of development? So it's not just development and change. It's actually thinking about how we can use any intervention to improve the quality of the environment. And this requires a different level of governance, a different way of thinking about governance. So, for example, in the work that I've been doing with HS2, of course, Centro is talking to the city councillors, talking to the Solihull City Council. Everybody's talking to each other. But what are they actually trying to achieve from the project? What's the vision overall? How can we begin to talk to each other in order to achieve a shared vision? And that means having a different remit. It means not just saying, I want the biggest, tallest building on my piece of land, but it actually means saying, well, this is what we want to achieve. We're going to share the costs, share the risks, and then share the benefits. So it's about people working together in order to achieve a shared vision, not just for the sake of it. This approach has had all sorts of, a whole list of people there who are sort of interested in talking more about it. And I was talking with the wetland park, the Tame Valley Wetland and Landscape Park board a couple of days ago. So they should be added on the list, but I haven't done. Because when I first started to talk about this, I went to see Sir Brian Briscoe, who's the head of HS2 with the board at that time. He said, just look at the area between Birmingham and Coventry, because that's the area that you're looking at, that you can control at the moment, and then we can think about how this approach might be extended. So this is I coloured in for the weekend, my husband said, this is the Blind Valley and the Tame Valley. I didn't know that the Blind Valley was there, if I'm honest, I really didn't. And I said, I've been telling people that he said, when I said, let's go and have a look at this valley between Birmingham and Coventry, he said, what valley? Are you sure it still exists? Yes, it does exist. Yeah, it is there. And the Blythe Valley is beautiful. This is the airport, which is just over here. This is this huge landfill site. This is the Tame Valley up there. Very interesting area. The Tame Valley, it reminds, I was in Costa Rica a while ago, a few years ago now, and the students said to me there, you don't understand. We don't want to go to the valley. Don't tell us to go and have a look at the valleys because they're dangerous, they're dirty, and nobody wants to live there. And when I went to the Tame Valley for the first time, I thought, dangerous. You can smell the river before you can see it. It just reminds me of Costa Rica. What a resource, and why is it like that? You've got typical the sewage beds that come out as they do in most eastern cities. So Castle Vale here, Chesterwood here. This is the Blythe Valley, which is one of the most beautiful areas of lowland rolling enclosed land in the UK and enclosed ancient countryside. And then Birmingham is on the uplifted plateau here, as you probably know. And so that we sort of examine the historical context. And then when you look at it in detail, you've got this huge legacy of industrialisation in Blythe. This is Spaghetti Junction, which is obviously an amazing place. Somebody said to me, oh, is that what you're going to do for Spaghetti Junction? I said, that's what it's like now. But the blight around it is absolutely huge, created by it. It's on the edge, it's in between all these different boundaries. So I began to think about, this is my crap map. I don't have a better term for it. But I'm just knowing the city, because I've been living here for a while now, thinking about where are the places that are socially, environmentally stressful? Where are the problem areas? And so underneath Spaghetti Junction, this area in Aston, when I was working there, it's clear that if you go there, every possible experiment in the last 30 years in housing is there. It's where all the refugees were housed when we were still taking in refugees. And it's just awful. It was really difficult place. Then you've got the Tame Valley, where this area here, the Tame Valley, it cuts the city. You can't go from north to south. You've got to go into the city, then back out again. That limits employment opportunities, educational opportunities, and of course it creates the noise pollution and the environmental pollution, I reckon, from all this whole ring of roads that go around here, creates enormous long-term stress. If you think about the cost of all of that, all of those issues, it's really significant, and I just don't think we can afford to do this again. And of course, this is the route that HS2 is taking, right round there, actually adding to this whole ring of roads that go around. But actually isolate that part of the city from the Blythe Valley, from the Tame Valley. No wonder nobody knows that it's there. You can hardly get to it. It's you've got to be really determined to even try and find it. So the point I've been saying really to HS2 is that if this comes through, and it looks increasingly likely that it is, it cannot contribute to this. It cannot make it worse. And wherever possible, it has to resolve some of these issues to actually re-establish a relationship between the city and what lies beyond it. And then I had Birmingham City Council being brilliant in actually looking at the data, the deprivation indices for the area. And when I first saw the map, I thought, God, they've run out of colours, or they haven't got the information there. But it's actually because it really shows that this ring of roads, this whole approach that we've developed over the last 15 years is actually mapped in reality through this data. So there's some physical evidence of some of the... I'm not saying that you can't have a causal relationship, but it's pretty coincidental that these problems exist in this area. So I'll go over. So what do we do instead? If we try and think then about how HS2 could LV can be used to see the region in a different way and begin to think about, we're talking about physical materiality, not just an abstract idea of place, but the place. How can we change it? How can we think about HS2 coming into Grand Central Park? Think about, that the aquifer in Birmingham is filling up because we're not making as many bicycles and things like that. The manufacturing basis is not there any longer as much. So the water table's rising, this is causing flooding. So why don't we actually begin to pump up water from here and take it out through the Tame, carefully avoiding Jaguar Land River, and then send it purified up into the Trent Valley so that we've got clean drinking water. We're contributing to it. How about replanting the Forest of Arden? Little green dots are on the map of the Forest of Arden. The only bits I could find of the Forest of Arden. If you put it into the Google, it comes up with a golf club. But perhaps we should think about replanting the Forest of Arden across this valley structure near the cities, near Coventry. And then the important thing really is to really improve accessibility so that people can get in from the city into this area, that you can cycle around it and begin to walk around it, actually walk to work, go from one part of the city to the other. So thinking about how we can have a different kind of urban living from the one that we've been creating over the last 50 years or so. This is the plan that went to Patrick McLaughlin. And then to look at it in a bit more detail, this is the Blythe Valley on the left-hand side and the Tame Valley on the right-hand side. And I was told when I wanted to go there, don't go there, Kathryn, unless you've got 6 big people with you, men, because it's so dangerous. But if you think about that long-term vision and what we want, how about having both of these valleys as centres for ecological destinations from Europe? Places where people want to come and see because of the quality of the environment. How can we actually begin to think about how about drinking bottled water from the Tame? And when I said that, somebody shouted out, after you, Kathryn. But it's an ambition. And once you say that, people begin to think, oh, well, perhaps we could. Yeah, perhaps we can aim to that. It's all about the jobs and skills, how we can actually begin to value the land, not just see that because we can build anything anywhere, we've become so casual about what we do with the landscape. We plant solar panels instead of food. We build those houses on friable cliffs. How about if we really begin to think about it in terms of food security and water security? Get people to start, in terms of jobs and skills, start using the land for food production. Not because people are impoverished, but because you can actually make a lot of money out of growing organic food. And the UNESCO people I told you about are really interested in, they have these things called Institutes for Traditional Knowledge, International Traditional Knowledge Institutes, ITKI. And they've said, if you want us to come to Birmingham, I mean, these places are normally in beautiful places like in Arizona or Fiji, but they've said, if you want to come to us to come to Birmingham, Kathryn, we'll come there. And I just think, just imagine what it would do for the region to have an ITKI centre here, where they're teaching kids traditional skills, but also new skills in terms of food production. So we can begin to have looking at orchards, forests, urban agriculture, and actually using these amazing places as centres for design, ecology and manufacturing. So we can begin to show what we produce within the region. Having places where you can actually exchange food. Thinking about the city boundary in a different way, which I'll come to now. Thinking about the whole digital creative sector. How can we begin to use them to connect up this place and actually enliven it? Sorry, I just went a bit too fast. They're valleys. We've got lots of water. We've got more water here than they've got in the south. Why don't we store water and actually sell it to the south, make some money? Why don't we have fish farming, as well as, of course, for recreation? So beginning to think carefully about how we can really use the assets that we have locally to not only purify water, but also this railway line that's coming through. Why can't it be the digital backbone for the whole of the UK? You could put in the whole infrastructure there, as well as meteorological information systems, so that you could begin to sell that data and make money out of it. Really significant, though, is the idea of mobility. So there has to be this network of local and long-distance cycle and footpaths. Sustrans have said, I know there's a proposal for a slow line, slow speed line, adjacent to HS2, but really they're interested in the 5 kilometre journeys, because that has the greatest impact on health. So how do we make sure that, again, through this project, the cycleways are put in right throughout the region, not just in the countryside, but in the cities, in the town centres? How we can actually have new bridges across the Tame Valley into the Blythe Valley, so that instead we can actually increase access. It's really, really significant to do that. And then actually think about the valley system, so that when you come down from the Covent Hills, you come into the Blythe Valley, you can see it. I didn't know Birmingham had a valley like that. Isn't that amazing? The city boundary, I mentioned it before. This is the city of distance here with Colson Church there. I hate this idea of softening city boundary or softening boundaries. I think it's really bizarre thing. I think the boundary should be really evident. It should be like the city wall. Why not have a whole line of wind turbines across the top of it, demarcating this is Birmingham? Thinking about a replenished valley system with really extraordinary agriculture feeding the city. And so what I'm looking at now with all the people I'm talking about is how this idea can actually lead and shape a whole range of different structures, including employment, housing, health, tourism, food, environmental and cultural strategies, because it works across those different areas. How we can, of course, we need to work with the different initiatives that are going on, UK Central and the NEC and the airport, and then also stations. I know you don't have a station here in Birmingham, but the station is absolutely vital. That's a diagram. It's not going to be that. I've been promised. But instead of having an iconic building, which perhaps people are working for, I was asked, why isn't it invisible? Why isn't the fact that the station is coming in used to actually shape the city? But it's absolutely led by the public realm strategy. And you might not even know it. This is in Hudson's Yard. That is actually a railway station underneath all that. It's got all these acres of squares, parks and squares underneath it, but it's been designed to be an essential part of the city. And so it's actually used as an investment for. It doesn't have to be a standalone building, which is what it's proposed at the moment. So we can actually use the intervention of the station to create places. This is in Antwerp, where there's a flash dance. If any of you, I don't know, if YouTube, look at the flash dance in Antwerp station, it's absolutely amazing. In Rotterdam, where you have this amazing station that's been part of the, it perhaps is a bit more iconic than what we're doing at the moment. And then so that was Rotterdam. This is Antwerp station, where you have, I think we're a bit late for this, but here you have high-speed regional and local lines in a station where natural light comes right down to the bottom of the station, and it's publicly accessible all around it. And this is what we're trying to get, I think. In every time we intervene, wherever we are, you want people to think, God, isn't that incredible? What an amazing place. Because that helps people get a sense of pride. That gives them an experience. What we're doing is shaping experiences. So they need to be good experiences. So how can we use the stations in a very progressive way to ensure that they contribute to the quality of the life of the region? Coming into the station, this is in Liège and the Calatrava station, where you have this fantastic view of the city as you come in. We already have a good view in Curzon Street. How do we, coming along the railway lines, how do we make sure that stays there? This is the Rotterdam station, when it was opened by the King and Queen of the Netherlands. Where's the space for us to have that in Birmingham? And in Solihull. How do we actually get a sense of arrival? I was working with Paul Watson, who wanted, as the station slowed down and came round the corner of, came into Solihull, to have this really extraordinary sense of arrival, so you know that you're approaching Solihull because of the woodland structure. Birmingham was renowned, or is renowned, as a city of 1,000 trades, so why can't it now become a city of 1,000 parks and squares, so that coming from the central station, this whole network of things throughout the region, connecting in so people can walk and cycle around the place. And we're looking at some of there are some really, truly awful, shouldn't be saying this is going out live, isn't it? But the route between the mailbox and Millennium Point, I don't know whether any of you have worked it, but it's challenging, let's put it like that. So how can we think about changing that so that, you know, the huge numbers of students who come from New Street Station, parents and relatives and friends, they actually come along a decent route that is actually really awe-inspiring, but actually does really give a great sense of identity to the city. The balancing ponds are a bit of a trial as far as HS2 are concerned, where they've got to put all the water, accommodate all the water. And so at the moment they're sort of in these great big concrete ponds, wherever they can fit them in between the railway lines. Why don't we use the water to create beautiful, ecologically sound housing developments right next to the station? It happens in other cities, and I think we should be thinking about that as well. And the starting point should be prioritising cyclists over cars, prioritising pedestrians over cars, not adding them on at the end after everything's been decided, we've got to put in the cycle routes and the pedestrian routes, but actually starting with that and then using the station to help us achieve that. How we can actually think about using, shaping these cultural strategies as well, and using this intervention, in fact any intervention, I'm talking about HS2, but it's the same in this area as well. How do you use it to energise the city? To create places for people to sit and talk and watch the world go by. Places where you don't have to pay for a cup of coffee, you can just sit down and enjoy the view with your friends. The Norwegian Public Roads Authority have a whole series of beautiful lookouts, so they created these. And we don't have the same dramatic topography as they have in Norway, but the landscape is rolling. There are places where you could actually create places to actually look out and see, watch the trains go by. How do you actually think about the view from the trains outwards as well as from the valleys towards the train line? And this is the one that makes the engineers go a little bit pale, but it also comes from Norway, where by law, any infrastructure that's developed should not detract from the quality of the landscape, and wherever possible should add beauty. And we have to think and realise that the legacy that is going to come from this, it's not just for the here and now. Anything that we do in the region is, the legacy is for hundreds of years, decades. So the HS2, the other thing that's happening is that we're beginning to think about this actually not just as the bit between Birmingham and Coventry or London and Coventry, but actually to think, well, this is an opportunity to create a massive landscape infrastructure, the length and breadth of the country, working with all these different stakeholders, the National Trust, the Midlands Forestry Initiative, a whole range of different canal and river trusts, to actually begin to really look differently at the UK. Just to, well, am I okay for time? It's fine. Okay. This is, we had a workshop on the 25th of February in Birmingham. We were expecting 25 people, 50 people turned up, including chief executives of various people, and asked them what makes a great city. I wanted to say region, but it's a bit more difficult to imagine what a region is. What makes a great city? If HS2 was up and running, what would it look like outside? Do you want it to look like the way it is? Do you want this to be this way? If you don't want it to be like that, what do you want it to look like? And this is really interesting. Don't forget that, to include the background. And then, how do we achieve this? So actually beginning to flesh out ways in which we can achieve this regional response. Because actually I've been told by HS2 that if we want something different, then it's up to us as a region to say we want something different. We don't think what's being offered at the moment is enough. We want it to be looked at differently. So we have to have that voice. We have to get together and actually demand something different. This is the LiDAR. This is LiDAR data looking at it in great detail. The city, this is accurate to within 250 millimetres. And I've got somebody who's very techy to help me do this. This is the station at the moment. This greyed out area is where it will be visible from through the city, which is quite extraordinary. And now I just want to mention Thurrock. I can't believe that you mentioned it as well, but I was asked to go down there because the guy who took me out for a cup of coffee every 2 weeks actually moved to Thurrock, which I thought was in Scotland. I had never heard of it really, and he said, Kathryn, we need you down there because it's so weird. And I went down there, and it is the most extraordinary place. This is not a Photoshop image. This is actually Procter & Gamble next to a church. It's very close to Dagenham. It is unknown, it has been unknown, but what we're doing is upping the ante in Thurrock, and actually Beat the Street was absolutely part of the initiative that we had there as well. They have the amazing advantages. 18 miles of river frontage that nobody really had looked at because the flood wall was there for 1953. Stopped visual access, actually stopped access, physical access to get to the riverfront. But just imagine having 18 miles of Thames to work with. The first time I went there, I saw this piece of land there, and they were trying to sell it for £80,000. I said, I'll have it. I can't, because it would be a conflict of interest, and I think it's now on the market for something like £250,000. But the reason I mention this is a picture of the floodplain, some of the proposals that we're looking at, the LiDAR data, the multiple deprivation indices again. This is Tilbury Falls, this is Tilbury. And the paler the colour, the more the deprivation, and you can see from these, except for housing, the housing isn't pale because actually the housing is, nobody really wants to go and live there that much. The housing isn't of good quality. But in terms of many of these indices, it is a really impoverished area. So how do we change attitudes? How do we get that organisational change that you've been talking about as well? And I've had a pile of reports about that high, and they're all from landscape architects, planners, engineers, you name it. People have looked at Thurrock, and none of them have made any difference. And since I've been there, I've heard thousands of reasons why nothing can happen, but everybody knows why you can't do something. And yet they have to fit somehow 23,000 houses into there. And there's nowhere where you can put it because of the landfill, the green belt, the high pressure gas mains, the pylons, the huge port with 40,000 traffic movements every day, and the list is endless. So I was really stuck, and I just imagine if we didn't have any of those constraints, how can we do it? If we knew what we wanted to achieve in the long term, what would it be? What would it look like? So this drawing, although it looks fairly innocuous, is actually quite political dynamite, because it's actually thinking without those constraints, where would we put the houses? How do we re-engage people with the river? How do we de-fen the core agricultural area up here, create the dark, quiet centre of how do we make sure that any development here, there's development across here where people can live and look at the river. Around here we actually make room for the river and begin to flood the plain, so that the marshes, so that it becomes part of the river system again, as they've been doing in Holland. So that's what we're thinking about. But the main thing is that to try and achieve it, and it's been, I suppose, it's got further ahead in Thurrock because it's just one authority, but is to begin to try to start with the top, because you can't get anywhere without changing that, and actually begin to think about organisational change. How do we have these cross-cutting targets that will drive everything that we do? And so, starting with the Yang ideas, urban life is about people, public life is about everyday life. How do we create, at every intervention, more urban life for all, more people to walk more, and more people to stay longer? And if you can actually have that at the starting point, whether you're an engineer, a developer, a landscape architect, or whatever, to start with, then it gives you a very different way to look at it. And then to think about how you can measure this, you measure measurable targets. Now, these are some that we just put up very quickly. But it's if you can ensure that 30% of families can grow their own vegetables by 2018, all school kids sing opera once a year and participate in constructing homes, because that's there because the Royal National Opera House Backstage Academy is based in Thurrock. So they already have these big events every day. How can we actually get everybody involved in it? So these things, actually the thing that is I really struggle with is apparently how can we increase the happiness score? Apparently men over 45 in Thurrock are the most unhappy in the country. How can we increase that by 10% each year? I don't know about that one. But increasing cycling, increasing number of visits to the river, making sure everybody can swim. And if these become the targets at the top of the organisation, then everything else can be seen in connection to that. And for my final slide, I came back to Montreal, where I met the mayor of Montreal and his right-hand person and her right-hand person. And she was the director of the city, and her remit was culture, heritage, quality of life and the status of women. This is an extraordinary organisational change. Beneath her, in her remit, was infrastructure, planning, engineering and housing. And I just thought, no way to put it. That turns things around. That puts things in a completely different way. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.